Well, thank you for joining us this afternoon for our WebEx session on Course Directive. I'm going to start today by going over just a brief review of how to create an exception, and all of the information that we'll share from that point will be very specific to the Course Directive exception type. I'll then show a couple of short demos of the different things that I'm talking about relative to the Course Directive, and then, as Jordan said, we'll save some time at the end for questions and answers. We have had already a few questions submitted to us, so I'll try to just go down the list and make sure that I get everything answered before our session is done today. So first things first, when creating an exception, and I'm sure you all remember this from your degree audit training, you'll want to probably run the student audit first. So the first thing that I like to do when I know I'm going to be creating some exceptions, or when I'm running audits with the possibility of creating some exceptions, is I like to use the breadcrumbs at the top of the Catalyst portal in order to open up the tabs, the sections of the system that I'm interested in working on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and first navigate to the screen, the Authorized Exceptions screen, where I'll be able to create some exceptions. The reason why I do this first is because it'll take me to the Authorized Student Exceptions page, and it'll allow for me to open up a new window by clicking on the new window hyperlink here in the upper right-hand corner. From there, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to navigate using the same breadcrumb path to the Advisor Center by going through Self-Service, Advisor Center, and then you can click My Advisees or Advisee General Info or Student Center. Any of these will be fine, and it'll take you to a search page where you can indicate the student that you'd like to see in the Advisee Center, or if you go to the My Advisees tab, it's going to take you directly to your list of advisees. Those are the people that have associations with you in the system, and you'll be able to select from that list the students that you want to look at. So the reason why I do this is because I'm sure some of you have probably already been making exceptions. You've noticed that when you utilize the portal tabs across the top here, in order to get to exceptions or to get through to the Advisor Center, if you're working in multiple locations on multiple tabs like I am now, sometimes it will tell you that the page that you're leaving is timed out. So if I'm creating an exception, I type in all the information, and then I go back over to the Advisor Center and I go to run an audit, it might, at the point that I tell it to run the audit, show me a little error message that says this page is timed out. And I kind of have to play this game back and forth between the pages in order to get the opportunity to get the work done using both of them. If you go through the breadcrumbs like I've just done here, you'll avoid that. It'll actually let you to work on the Authorized Student Exceptions page and stay current on your page in the Advisor Center, so you won't get that error that can occasionally slow you down. So the first thing that I'm going to do, like advisors will often do when they're meeting with a student or preparing to meet with a student, is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring up a student's information in the Advisor Center. So I type in my IMPL ID, I tell it to search, and it takes me to the Student Center page. Right now, because I elected to choose Advisee General Info, it has me on the General Info tab in the Advisor Center. Most of you will be familiar with the Student Center tab as the page that you'll want to be on in order to run an audit. So I'm going to go ahead and be on that Student Center tab, and I'm going to use the drop-down menu under the Academics bar here. And I'm going to click Academic Requirements, and then I'm going to push the little blue button, the little go arrow, in order to retrieve the audit for the student. When you do this, the audit system is going to bring back any programs that the student is actively declared in. So on the Academics tab, on the right-hand side of your Student Center, you'll notice that if you click on that tab, you get a listing of institution, career, and program at the top of that page. You can click on the hyperlinks that are displayed here in order to see the programs the student has been declared in or is declared in, and the status relative to the particular program. So in looking at the entries for this student, I noticed that they do have an active program, and I would expect that to be returned when I then ask for the academic requirements report. If the student has one active program, it's going to display here. If the student has 7 active programs, all 7 are going to be included in the report. They're going to be siloed by career, meaning that if the student has 6 undergraduate programs that are active and 1 graduate program that's active, you're going to see a little bar appear across the top that allows for you to switch between the reports by career. So you'll see all of the active programs or 1 career displayed, and then you'll be able to use that toggle in order to go to the next career, and it'll show you the active programs for just that career. So, as is often the case, when you're working with a student or preparing to work with a student, you're going to run the audit and you're going to see how all of the coursework that the student has taken is being applied to that student's program. In our Catalyst audits, you're likely to see a mix of coursework. That coursework can be enrolled, credits that the student enrolled in here at the University of Cincinnati. They can be transfer credits that have been brought in and equated. They can be test credits or other credits that we've assigned some courses for. Or the student can have a mixture of quarter and semester work. The degree audit system is set up only to read the semester versions of courses. So any coursework that the student has taken since 12FS is naturally displayed in a semester format. But the courses that the student took prior to 12FS have had what we call self-articulated models created for them. Those models display the semester equivalents to the quarter courses that students have taken. So in looking at the audit, this student, I'm noticing by the term that's displayed in the WIN category next to their courses, only has courses that they've taken since the university has been on semesters. If a student has one of these courses that they've taken on quarters that we have equated to their semester equivalent, you'll notice that the term displayed in the WIN column says self-articulated term. These courses are particularly important to a student's audit report when they have quarter courses because those semester equivalents have an adjusted unit value. When a quarter course is equated to semesters, we need to see that unit's value adjusted down to its semester equivalent as well in order for the student's total credit hour displays to be correct. So in looking through the audit, lots of courses are falling into different places in the audit for different reasons. I can tell where courses are being accepted or not accepted by the statuses that are displayed throughout, and I can see other useful information about the course just by looking at the entries that are caught in the audit. When I get down to the bottom, it's possible that I'll see a section in the audit that says courses not used by the audit or by the degree or by the minor or certificate. When I see these courses, I might find that for all students, I'm not accepting these courses for particular requirements, but for students who have specific cases, I am interested in accepting one of these courses in a particular space in the audit. So for the purposes of an example in looking at this student's audit, we have 3 courses at the bottom that are currently not used by the program. And let's say that we are interested in utilizing one of those to complete this pre-business administration general education portion of the audit. So it's saying that we have some different courses. We have a historical perspectives course. We have a humanities course. We also need, in this case, a fine arts course. So we might be interested, even though we have some of the courses that we want, in taking one of these extra courses and applying it to this space. That concept of moving a course from one location in the audit to another is the purpose of the course directive exception. So in order to complete that action, I would create a course directive. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip over and click on my Authorized Student Exceptions tab. And I'm going to sort of walk through the process of creating an exception for a student. And in particular, creating a course directive exception for the student. So keep in mind, the idea is that we want to move one course from a non-applicable space in the audit to an applicable space in the degree. We're going to move, let's say, that Psychology 1001 course, we're going to move it up into the general education space for fine arts. So in creating an exception, there are two things that you can do. You can either search to see if an existing exception is there, and if it's there, there might be the chance that you can utilize that just by adding on to it, or you can choose to add a new value. And if you add a new value, you're going to be creating a new exception. So just like before, in your degree audit training, you'll have learned that when you click the Add a New Value tab, you are going to be presented with an assessment override category that has all zeros indicated in that space. You're not going to want to change any of those. What all zeros mean in Catalyst typically is that it's a system-generated number, and it's queuing off of the total number of exceptions that have been created at that point so that the system knows to assign a unique value to the exception that you're creating. So we're going to leave those numbers the same. We're going to leave those at all zeros, and we're just going to click Add. Once we click Add, we're presented with the first of two screens that we need when making 4 of our 5 exception types that we have. So all of the information that's maintained on this first page of the exception is telling us primarily where we want this exception to be applied to. Because in the Catalyst audit, unlike Darwin, we have the ability to run multiple programs in the same report. When we write an exception, it's important that we specify which of those programs we want the exception to apply to. So in looking at the fields that were presented on the first page of the exception, we come across effective date. Effective date tells the system from what point forward do I want this exception to apply in the degree audit. More often than not, you're going to be comfortable with just leaving this effective date as is. It auto-populates the day that you're creating the exception on, and what that indicates is that from that day forward, your exception is going to be valid and will process in the audit system as long as the status remains active. Across from the effective date, you'll see the status column, or I'm sorry, the status drop-down. Status drop-down presents you with 2 options. The first is the default, that's active. That means that the degree audit exception is going to process in the degree audit report. The second is inactive. So if you created an exception for a student based on some agreement that you have, the student would take the course by a particular point in time, or the student would take the course in a particular section, you can create an exception for the student. And if they, for whatever reason, do not take that action, or they take that action incorrectly to fulfill the agreement that the exception is built on, you can turn the exception off. And the way that you would do that is by choosing the status of inactive. From the point that I select inactive and save it, it's saying, as of the effective date that I'm indicating, this exception no longer will process in the degree audit report. Because it may be important from time to time for me to maintain the history of the exception that I'm working on. Maybe for our example, you want to be able to have the original exception still there to show that it was active from the point that you created it until the point that you made it inactive. You can do that by choosing to add a new row on top of your previously existing exception. When you do that, you'll notice in the top right-hand corner of this screen, we go from having a value of 1 of 1 to 1 of 2, and we have our Show Next row arrow highlighted. What that lets you do is to toggle between the two rows that you've created. So if this is your initial row and you created this back in July, 1st of July, 0701, 2016. Let's fix my effective date here. And this was when you created your original exception. When you toggle to the second effective dated row, so now it's October 13th, and we're saying that this exception is no longer valid, we can switch the status to inactive. We can use the show next row arrows to move back and forth between the two rows that we have on the exception. So you can see the exception was created as far as this first row is concerned. As of 7/1/2016, it had an active status. That means from the time that it was created up until the next effective dated row, it was going to process in the audit report. Then we have another row that's added on to the exception as of October 13th, 2016, and we mark the status on that row as inactive. So that just means that your exception was valid for any audits that were run between July 1st and October 13th, and as of October 13th, because the status is inactive, you're no longer having that exception process in any audit requests that are made as of this date or later. So it is a way to maintain history if you are interested in doing that. Your description field is just really for you or other advisors that will be working with the student. When you've already created an exception, maybe you've created multiple exceptions for a particular student, you're going to want a way to be able to know which one is which when you're searching back through those exceptions. So the description is what's going to be displayed when you search for the exceptions created by the student. And if you use some kind of familiar naming mechanism, you'll be able to suss out which exception was written to push a course to the natural science requirement from one that you wrote to place a course in the student's major. The long description field is one that is populated in the degree audit report. So this is a place that you could put notes that you'll be pushing out to the student, because they'll be able to actually click on a hyperlink next to this course in the audit that you're utilizing in this exception, and it'll display this exact text. So it is a good place to keep some notes or maybe a reminder or two for the student there as well. So I'm just going to put in just a few values here. The short description field is really only something that you're going to come across if you're doing a broad query of exceptions, and that's something that's not going to happen a lot. You can notice next to the field it doesn't have an asterisk, so it's not a required field, and it will auto-populate from your description if you don't put anything in there, so you're okay not to fill anything out. Under the override details header, you're going to find that there's a listing of career program plan and subplan. This is where you're indicating in your exception which program you would like for this exception to apply to. So one of the easiest ways to be able to find this information, if you're back on your Advising Student Center tab, is just to click on that Academics tab again and look and see what the lowest declared value is on your active programs that are highlighted in this space. So in this case, I see this particular program, and that's what I'm going to go ahead and fill in my authorized exception screen. So a quick little tip: if you're looking at a student whose CPP stack is only declared down to the plan, you don't have to actually fill in the career in the program. If you just fill in the plan code and hit tab, it'll backfill those two values for you. So if you're creating a reasonable number of exceptions, It's a way to save a little bit of time. But what these fields are now saying is, when I look at degree audit components for this student, when I'm looking at the degree audit report, which program in that report should this exception be valid for? And you'll see on the next screen that we show you that your options are tied to the declaration that you make in this space as well. So if I'm looking at a student who is, say, a major studying BS in biology, that particular program has sub-plans associated with it, and on that academics tab, I'll want to be careful to note whether the student is declared down to the plan or the sub-plan level, because students could study just the Bio BS plan, or they could have Bio A, Bio B, etc. for sub-plans, and having that information correct in your override details is going to be what determines whether or not your exception is pointed at the right program. So next is your selection data, and this is very important. I'm going to go ahead and leave the selection code as it is. Right now it's pointed at a student. And I'm going to go ahead and enter in the selection data field the student's info ID number. If you just have the student's N number, you can use the ID lookup in the upper right-hand corner in order to be able to convert that N value to an info ID very quickly, and then plug it into the selection data field. The other values in the selection code are academic program, academic plan, and student growth. And we generally do not advocate for using these values. The reason being, if you select academic program and then select a program, the action that you're taking is going to apply to all students who are running a degree audit within that program. The same goes for plan, and the same goes for group. So those are very heavy-handed types of exceptions. And if you have a change that sort of escalates to that level, we encourage you to contact your encoder, because they'll be able to implement those changes in a more permanent way for you, to where you can be sure of the students that you're impacting, probably more so than using an exception with a selection code of one of those two values, or three values, sorry. So once I have my selection code and selection data populated, I'm going to go and I'm going to use the operation code dropdown, and I'm going to select course directive. You have 4 options in there, but this particular session that we're on today is just about course directive. We're going to be doing sessions for all of the exception types that you have the possibility of utilizing. So you'll get some detailed information just like this concerning requirement change and override and waiver, and course substitution as well. But you'll get those at a later date and time. So once the first screen has been filled out, as we've done here, you're going to click the Create Exception hyperlink. That's going to take you to the second and final page in creating your course directive. Your Directed Courses 2 fields are only going to let you select the degree audit components that we have built to the CPP stack that you've declared on the first screen. So in this case, we picked a very specific requirement, a very specific plan, and that plan has a requirement group and several requirements, and those requirements, they have several lines as well. So let's say in this case, we're going to stick to our example. We only had one group to choose from, so we can be sure that we got the right value there. We're going to take a look at the values that exist, and we're going to select one of these in order to be able to place a course within the audit. In this case, we're going to pick the Gen Ed section. We try to make sure as encoders that the descriptions that you see when making these selections are explanatory enough that they help you to pick the right space in the audit to make changes. When you click to get your requirement, you're also going to want to click, for most course directives, down to a specific line so that you can indicate where this course should be going in the audit. We said in this case we're going to put this one in the fine arts space of the Gen Ed. So we make that kind of selection for the directed courses so that the system knows where within the program that you've indicated would you like to make this particular type of change. Now all of that is pretty straightforward and it's applicable to pretty much all 4 of the exception types that you'll access under the authorized student exceptions page. In the Directed Courses 2 field, we start to see some different options that are going to help us and getting the type of action that we want from this particular exception. So the course sequence number is sort of an internal type of field. It's going to be auto-populated, and there's really nothing that you can accomplish by changing that number. So you want to go ahead and leave that as it is. In the directive type drop-down, you're going to see that you have two choices. You have a choice to substitute a value, or you have a choice to exclude a value. When you are substituting a value, you are going to be adding a course to the location that you've indicated in the audit. When you are excluding a value, you're going to be removing a course that has been placed in a particular space in the audit by degree audit processing from the area in the audit that you've indicated. So if I ran the audit first and this psychology course showed up in the fine arts requirement because I would have accepted that, but not for this particular student, I could write a course directive exception. I could select a directive type of exclude, and I could select my psychology course. And what that will do is it will allow for the next time you run the audit for that psychology course to move past this requirement that I've indicated and apply somewhere else in the audit that it could potentially apply. The advantage of using an exclude value rather than a substitute value just to push a course into another location in the audit is that you may not know all of the attributes that are associated with a course or all of the encoding work that's been done in the background for the audit, and you may be just content to let the course fall wherever else it could fall rather than indicating that with a substitute type of exception. So the exclude value can be helpful when you're trying to get courses away from a particular area. In this case, though, we're going to stick with the substitute because, like we said, we want to bring that course up from our courses not used in the audit portion to the gen ed. We've indicated that there. The next choice that we have to make is we have to make a choice of course source. Now, in looking at course source options, each one has a specific value that's going to show you different things when you select that value. So course offerings allows for you to look at any course that exists in the catalog. The course doesn't necessarily have to be tied to the student's enrollment for you to use this value of course offering. And in particular, it is useful for two specific types of actions. If you're proactively making an exception for a student who hasn't taken a course yet, then you're going to need to use the course source, course offering value in order to be able to complete your exception. The other way that you would use course source is if the student has a self-articulated course, meaning that you're trying to make an exception for the semester component of a course that the student took on quarters. You need that semester equivalent value because that's the one that's displayed in the audit. The student took the course on quarters, so the semester equivalent is not included in the student's enrollment. The enrollment still reflects the format that the student took it in. So when trying to make an exception for a course that is the semester equivalent to a quarter course, a self-articulated course, we're going to use that course offering value as well, and we're going to click search. When we do that, we can indicate the subject area and the catalog number, and it will take us to that course selection. In order to select that course, we're going to click on the check next to the course that we want to select, and it'll go ahead and it'll populate information in the space that you're looking for. Now, I selected a partial course, which is definitely a semester equivalent, and you'll notice that the offering number is 1. When you're looking for a self-articulated course, when you want to write a course directed to the semester equivalent to the quarter course the student took, you'll always want to select a value that has an offering number of 1. So even if the course was equated to what we call the parent course, meaning that it isn't a partial, it's a full allotment of credit, you'll see that when you type in that subject and number, it brings back a lot of different values. The offering number indicates where the course was possibly taken from, and the offering number 1 is always reserved for transfer courses or self-articulated courses. So if I wanted the self-articulated instance of a quarter course that equated to HISC 1005, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select one of these offering numbers with a 1 in that category, and an effective date that I think probably is before when the course was assigned, which if you use the value 01/01/1901, that's kind of the system's beginning of time number, and it's usually a very safe bet for selecting those types of courses. So if I made this exception here, what it would say is go and get the semester equivalent of a quarter course that was equated to History 1005 and place it in the Fine Arts section of the General Education requirement in the Pre-Business Administration program. If the student has taken the course in the format that you're interested in, which would be semesters in this case, you can use a course source value of enrollment. When you select the search button, you can pick your subject and area to filter on, or you can just click search courses and it'll bring back all of the courses associated with the student's record. This can be a slower process than filtering out towards what you want, depending on the number of courses the student has taken and the time of day and system demand that we're experiencing. So in this case, when I hit search, I see all the courses that the student has taken, and I can go ahead and I can click on any of those values. Now, when using enrollment as your course source, there are two very important rules to remember. The first rule is, this is a window into the student's record, meaning that if the student took quarter courses here at UC, those quarter courses will be displayed in this space. They're displayed as unconverted instances of a course. If you select those courses, it will bring that quarter course into the audit, but it will do so at a number of hours that is consistent with quarters and not semesters. So if I'm trying to bring in a 3/4-hour course, the audit system and the hours counters and everything associated with it will read that course as if it was taken for 3 hours. And because the audit system is set up to read semester hours, the student is going to be over-awarded credit in the audit based on that action. So you never want to select quarter courses from an enrollment course source. That's a surefire way to make sure that the audit is sort of over-judging the value of a student's course and awarding more credit than they've actually earned. Or if it's a quarter course that you're interested in seeing brought into the audit in some way, find the self-articulated value, find what it's equated to, and it'll go ahead and allow for you then to go and use a course source of offering to be able to make that exception. The other thing to remember when using enrollment is that you can see the official grade on courses that have been graded sort of off to the right here. Some of these grades are valid grades and some of these grades are invalid grades. But the course directive exception does not discriminate against invalid grades, since you, as the user, are telling the audit where to place courses and not actually having it done by the audit system itself. So if I select this first course, even though it's a course the student withdrew from, it is going to push it into a space in the audit, and it's going to do so with the units that are associated with that course, even though the student did not earn them. So in this case, there are 3 hours, 3 units associated with the course, and those 3 units are going to be utilized by the audit system to determine if the space this course now resides in is satisfied or not satisfied. So this is not only important when you are first making the exception for a course that has already been graded, but it's also important when you're making exceptions for courses that are currently in progress and have not been graded. When you make an exception to a course that's in progress and has not yet been graded, it is going to push it into a space in the audit, and that exception will exist even after the course has been graded. So there is the possibility that the student could do poorly in the course and get a non-applicable grade, but because the exception has already been written for the course and is pinning it to that space in the audit, it will continue to be there after the grade has been assigned. The assignment of the grade doesn't somehow go back and take away that the exception exists. So other places that you could find courses that you're interested in, we have sort of the external sources of credit broken out for you. If it's a true transfer course that we've equated here at UC, you can use transfer courses as your course source to find those values. If it's a credit that we've assigned because of a test the student has completed, you'll see that under test credit. And if it's an other credit situation, meaning that the student has some kind of life experience or some other type of mechanism that's caused them to be awarded credit in the system, you'll see that listed under other credits. So in this instance, though, because I want to stick with our example, I'm going to go ahead and select our psychology course. Now, once that psychology course and its details have been placed in the audit, you'll notice that under the directive type of substitute, you still have a couple of values that are displayed at the bottom. The term is grayed out because it's already been assigned. The course has already been taken, it was taken in a particular term, so that's just populated for you. If you use a course source of offering, though, you're selecting against the catalog. You're selecting a course that hasn't been taken yet, and so you can use the term field to further specify which courses in that exception are going to be applicable. So if you use an offering in order to pick up a course in your exception, meaning that the student hasn't taken it yet, then you can use your term field to say, yes, it needs to be this particular course, and for this exception to work, it also needs to be taken in this particular term. Other fields that you can find underneath the course value that you select for a directed type of substitute, you'll find the directed units field. What the directed units field allows for you to do is to indicate the amount of credit associated with a course that you are willing to accept in the space that you are pointing this exception towards. So if the student is taking this course that I'm looking at here in my exception, but I only want half of the credit associated with that course, or I only want 2 hours of credit associated with that course to apply, I can indicate a directed units value, and it is going to cause the audit system to manually split that course into 2 separate pieces. One that contains the 2 hours that I'm now directing as the gen ed requirement, and another course that will be displayed later in the audit that has the remaining credit associated with that course. One word of caution with the directed units value: when you're using this value, you want to make sure that, particularly with a course offering course source, you want to make sure that the courses you're going to get have more than the number of directed units that you're indicating. If I say that I want a number of units like 27 in this field, and then the student takes the course for 3 hours, it's going to cause the audit system to error out because it doesn't have enough hours to make the split that you are indicating. Under the directed units field, you can see a directed courses value for instances of a course that are repeated. If the student takes multiple ensembles that are the same course number in the same semester, and you just need one of those courses, you can use the directed courses field to indicate the maximum number of instances of a course that you're using in your exception to be pointed at the space that your exception is pointed to. So in my example here, I have English 1001 as my course that I've selected. If I know that the student is going to take that twice in the same term, but I only want one of those courses to be applied in my exception, I'm going to use a directed courses value of 1, and it's going to stop it at 1. Typically, when you're using the directed courses value, it's going to take the oldest instances of the course first. So with a course source of enrollment, you don't really have to worry about that too much because you're indicating a course that's been taken at a specific point in time, and if you're needing to use a directed courses value, that means that they took the course multiple times within the same term. So you probably don't have that too often. But if you're using a course offerings value and you do know that that leaves the term wide open because you have no term indicated, and you just use a directed courses value, it's probably going to take the oldest instance of the course first and let everything kind of slide on by once it hits the directed courses value that it needs. So using that same kind of logic, if you, let's say, only want one instance of the course, you don't have a preference in terms of term, but you want the course that's graded at a particular point or better, you can use your minimum grade points per unit field. Adding a value here is going to hold the course in your exception to some additional criterion. So if you're making this type of exception that I have on the screen now, you're probably making some kind of proactive exception for the student. Because you have a directed courses value, you're thinking that they're taking it more than once, and you only want one of those instances, but you want the one of those instances that is better than a B or better at that point, if I'm indicating 3 in the minimum grade points per unit field. So it gives you a little different way of dealing with courses, particularly when you have multiple courses, to be able to get the right instance that you're interested in. The last field that you can utilize is the course topic ID field. And let me go ahead and select a course that I know has some topics to choose from. So topics in English Lit is the course that I'm going to go ahead and choose. And when I click the magnifying glass next to the course topic ID, I can see that there are 12 different topics that have been used in this particular course. And if I'm interested in just one of these sections over another, like in this case, zombies, monsters, sounds like a particularly interesting section. So I can choose that course topic ID in order to limit the ENGL 2001 instances on a student's record to applying in this space in the audit to just the ones that have this topic ID associated with them. So when you have sort of open courses like this where the course's topic changes over time, those topics are stored in the catalog and they're available for you to access through the course topic ID when you need to get down to a specific instance of that course. So that gives us some flexibility in the course-directed exception to be able to grab onto the things that we need to grab onto in order to push courses around the audit. I'm going to go back to our original example, and I'm going to select the psychology course that exists on the student's record. You can see that it dropped in all the information that I need. This is a pretty standard course-directed exception, so I'm not going to bother putting in directed units or courses, no minimum grade point value, because this course doesn't have any topics associated with it. It's not an offering that changes over time. You can see that that field is grayed out. The term is already populated as well because this course has been taken and completed per the student's enrollment. So all I have to do at this point is click OK and save my exception, and I can go back to my Student Center tab, and I can choose to run my report again. And when I do that, I'll scroll down to the place in my audit that I was pointing my exception at, which is the Gen Ed section of the audit, and I'll notice that now this Intro to Psychology course that I was writing in my course-directed exception is in the fine art space where my course-directed exception was pointed to. I can click on the hyperlink in the notes field, and it will tell me the long description associated with my course. So when I'm making this type of exception, perhaps there is a need. I run the audit again, I see kind of what happened in the audit. I notice that there are a couple of other courses that sit down here in the courses not used by the audit section. There might be a need for me then to add on to the exception that I've already made. Let's say you don't have the exception open anymore. You're back on your search screen like I am now. What you can do is you can use this selection data field and type in the student's IMPL ID number and click search, and when you do that, it'll bring up all of the exceptions that have been written for this student. You can find the one that you want. You'll notice in this description field, I've done a good job of contradicting myself. I just typed in test for 2 exceptions. You can see in the plan they're pointed at two different plans, and other than that plan field, I would have no way of knowing what these exceptions do and trying to find out what they are quickly. So I would almost have to click through both of them to find out which was the one I was interested in without this plan field, which usually these are all going to be written to the same plan, so there's not going to be a lot of value there. A better description would have been maybe the course to FA, Psych 1001 to FA would have been a good one, because then I could quickly assess between the two which was the exception that I was interested in getting back into. So I do want this second exception. I can click on it. When I do, it takes me back to the information that I was working on. I can click on the Create Exception link, and let's say I want to add some of those other courses to this same space in the audit. When I do that, I have to do it in the exception that I've already created, because the audit system will only let you create one course directive exception per location in the audit. So now that I've created this one that's pointed at the fine arts line in the Gen Ed requirement in the pre-business administration degree audit, if I want any other courses to go to this space, I have to just add on to what I already have done in my directed courses field. I can do that by clicking the plus sign, the add a new row value, for the top right-hand corner of the directed courses field. So when I do that, I see that another space opens up, and I can go through the same process of finding and assigning courses. I'm going to go ahead and put just one more course on, this COM 1076 course on, and click OK. And now I've added all three of these courses, Psych 1001, English 2007, and COM 1076, to this area in the audit that I'm indicating in just one simple exception. So I save my exception again, go back in, and run the audit again for this student. And when I do that, I can scroll back down to my Gen Ed section of the audit, and I'll notice that now all three courses are placed in the audit. Now you'll notice in this notes field, 1, 2, 3, it does show the same note under each hyperlink because they are all in the same exception, so they have the same long description field, but the numbers are correlating with this course sequence number. So course sequence 001 is Psych 1001, and course sequence 2 is 002. These numbers can change over time because they're also queuing up on other exceptions that are being written for the students in this audit report. So the way the numbers are determined is that the lowest numbers are presented earlier in the audit and the higher numbers are later in the audit. But as far as these three courses are concerned, if I add two more exceptions up here to the business communication section of Gen Ed, it's going to turn these numbers to 3, 4, 5, or however many courses I've added at that point in time, in order to indicate how many exceptions and sort of where those exceptions may lie relative to other exceptions in the audit. So it's just a little bit of a visual cue. So let's say that's particularly helpful to be able to see that sort of thing, but let's say that's not actually what I wanted to do now that I've run it again, and I'd rather just exclude this COM 1071 course. I don't want any of these Gen Ed courses here. I don't want this COM value here. I can go back into my exception, and I can get rid of these fields just as easily as I added them to my exception, just by clicking this little minus sign and saying it's okay to delete those rows. And I can change my directive type to exclude, and I can go and I can search for COM 1071, which we saw was in the space for humanities and literature. So I'm going to change my line number to humanities and lit, and I'm going to click OK. Now what my exception says is this communications 1071 course is currently being applied in humanities and literature. I don't want it there. So don't allow it to apply there, but let it to apply anywhere else that it could possibly apply. So I'm going to save that and go down and hit cancel on my audit and just hit the go button again.
going to update my audit based on the exception as it is now. And when I scroll down to the bottom of the report, that COM 1071 course is no longer in our Humanities and Literature. You can see English 2007 came up because it also has the code. And you can see that COM 1071 has pushed down into the courses not used by the audit section because that's the next nearest section that it would be an applicable course for. You'll notice with the exclude value as a directed type that you don't get a notes field. So when you exclude a course, the student doesn't see that detail, that long description on the web-based version of the course. One thing that you might notice, though, is that if you click on the PDF version of the audit, it's being blocked here. Let me tell it to always allow. And I'll kick it off again. Is that you often see notations for things that are not displayed, like requirement change when it's been completed is not displayed in the web, or in this case, something that's excluded from this line has not been displayed. But on the PDF version of the audit, that detail is present. So if you are excluding a course, a little notation, and here is your long description right here, patched through on the PDF version. So that still is an important field, even if you're excluding values, because it is communicated in a space that the student can get to and could potentially see. So it does still hold some value for that to be written. Now, let's say I change my mind again, and that exception is no longer good either. I actually don't need an exception anymore based on what I've seen, and I want to get rid of it. So to get rid of an exception, you have two options. One, you can mark it inactive, but you'll notice when I try to mark it inactive, it says, oh, you can't do that unless you're in this particular type of mode. Down at the bottom, you'll notice that the correct history button is present, and if you hover over it, it says correction mode. You can click this button, and it will allow for you to change the status on your existing exception to inactive. So now, just by doing that and saving it, I've already changed whether or not this exception should process in the audit report. When I rerun the audit, scroll down to the Gen Ed section of the audit, now that Communications 1071 pops back up in Humanities and Literature because it's as if the exception that I wrote doesn't exist at this point. The other way that you can go about it, once that correct history mode button is clicked, you can click on the minus sign on the first page of your exception, click OK, and save, and now that exception is gone. You've deleted it for good. So if I then go back to my search field, type in the student's info ID, and search again, now it's just going to catapult me right into the exception that was for the CommBA program. This was the other one that I had written, and the reason why it does that is because the student only has one exception left. You'll remember we had two after we had created the exception that we just deleted. So that's how you get rid of the exception overall. Correct history, put the minus sign, say OK, save it, and you're good to go. We would give you a note of caution when trying to delete exceptions because sometimes it's useful just to have the history there. If you need it, you can always go in and change the courses that are associated in that space, or you can leave it as inactive. So it's usually better to have some record that the exception existed at some point than to not have it. So given our recommendation would be that you just use the inactive status rather than deleting the exception altogether. So those are the values of the course directive exception and sort of a very brief demonstration on its use. I think we'll go ahead and pause for just a moment now and get switched over to the